All right. Before I get started with this presentation, uh, let me share, by way of this cartoon, a quick thought experiment. Imagine this. You walk into a bank to withdraw, let's say, $100. And then the bank teller asks you for your ID, which is normal. But then the bank teller asks the manager to approve the withdrawal. Then the manager goes and asks for a supervisor's sign-off as well, who then asks for the bank CEO's stamp of approval, just for you to be able to withdraw your money. So 30 minutes later, you walk out with your money, but how do you feel? Do you feel a bit confused, a bit annoyed, or a mixture of both? So this brief thought experiment, you might be thinking that the problem was the people, but the problem wasn't the teller or his manager or the supervisor. The problem was actually a system that was built to prevent bad things from happening, bad things like fraudulent transactions. But this system left no room to allow good things to happen, good things like a good customer experience. In a nutshell, that's the story of the UN's current reimbursement system, which we will be diving into today in this presentation. So today, I'll be addressing this recurring operational challenge for UN field missions, which has to do with prolonged reimbursement delays for consultants, especially. While the issue may appear to be an administrative issue, it actually has direct implications for operational efficiency in general. It also affects team morale, especially the field teams, and also affects project delivery timelines. And my goal in this presentation is to basically unpack the root causes and outline a high impact and implementable solution, which I do believe can close the gap and solve this recurring problem. So we'll follow a three-part structure. And first, I'll provide a clear articulation of the problem so that we have a shared understanding of the real problem at hand. Second, I'll walk you through a structured solution focused on getting immediate results. And finally, some proposed next steps to test and validate the approach that I'll be proposing. So let's dive in. So the current UN reimbursement process is basically constrained by a misalignment between field mission realities and administrative requirements. So on any given project, consultants incur legitimate reimbursable expenses, but the current system often lacks the agility and also the flexibility to process the reimbursements efficiently, resulting in delays and general operational friction. Two recurring concerns emerge from the current situation. One, reimbursement claims are rejected by finance if they deviate even slightly from the pre-approved budgets. And two, fixing these budget discrepancies requires a formal contract addendum, which must pass through multiple levels of internal approvals, just like that example at the beginning with the bank, each adding unnecessary delays to the timely release of these funds. At the core of this issue is actually a structural problem at the intersection of a centralized approval bureaucracy rigid budgeting policies, and fragmented and siloed workflows. Let me break down the problem step by step using this visual framework on this slide here. On the left hand side, we have the current state, which I'm referring to as result one or the as is state, where currently consultants routinely have to wait for weeks, 4 to 6 weeks or sometimes longer, for their reimbursements. And this creates significant friction, not only for those on the ground, but also for the budget owners and the finance teams who are forced into this repeated, often unnecessary back and forth over the contract addendums. Ultimately, this undermines morale and slows down operational deployment, right? Now shift your focus to the, let me try and get a pointer here. Yeah, shift your focus to the right side here, which is our desired result or the to-be state. So this is the ideal state, what us consultants call the target operating model. And the goal is to actually get to this ideal state where reimbursements are processed in a predictable and efficient time frame, ideally within 7 days. And we also envision a minimal touch approval workflow. Not so many people have to touch the approval or the documents along that workflow. And this we envision will eliminate most ad hoc budget revisions, right? So this isn't really just about speed. It's about enabling faster field deployments, right? And project delivery timeliness, which will eventually just also strengthen UN consultant collaboration and ultimately just improving overall operational efficiency. Now, the middle section here, labeled the gap, identifies the 3 root causes preventing us from reaching that desired future state. First is the decision making being overly centralized, creating these bottlenecks that we have discussed so far. Second, of course, the budgeting policies are rigid and really intolerant of any minor budget variances. And the third, workflows remain very siloed and manual, preventing real-time visibility or automation of any kind. So the implication is really clear here. If we want to move from R1 to R2, we must address these pain points to close this gap here. So how are we going to do that? Let me propose a solution. So to flip the script, we propose a 3-part solution. First, decentralize authority to local teams to enable timely decisions. Second, establish flexible variance thresholds, flexible budget variance thresholds to avoid unnecessary contract addendums. Third, automate the majority of the reimbursement process using real-time budget monitoring tools. And this solution framework actually enables 3 key outcomes: a reduction in approval delays, fewer contract revisions, and significantly faster payments. Critically, actually, the design is scalable across UN missions and does not actually compromise financial controls and auditability of the UN. So that's our proposed solution. And this slide distills actually the core of the proposed transformation journey. At the top there, we have our primary directive, primary objective, which is to design the UN's reimbursement system, so that consultants are paid within 7 days without triggering any excessive contract revisions or administrative overhead. This objective then breaks down into three secondary goals, as you can see here. First, we need to eliminate multi-layered approval bottlenecks. Second, we aim to reduce the number of contract to budget addendums by at least half, by at least 50%. And third, we target the automation of we're also targeting the automation of reimbursement workflows so that things move faster. And each of these goals address a specific pain point, as you can see here. The first pain point being what you can call decision latency, caused by, like I mentioned before, over centralized authority. And the second pain point stems from rigid budgeting rules that can't accommodate minor and even sometimes expected variances, right? And the third pain point is about speed and visibility, right? We want the manual processes to be automated so that it's easier to also track spending and validate claims in real time. And below the pain points, you can see the proposed solutions, which align across people, processes, and technology. For people, we recommend, of course, like I mentioned, decentralized approval powers to local teams, local field teams. On the process side, actually more like local country teams, right? Country-specific teams. On the process side, we propose introducing flexible budget variances to reduce unnecessary redrafting. And from a technology standpoint, we suggest, like I've mentioned, automating reimbursements using real-time budget monitoring and budget checks. Now, this next slide builds directly on the previous one, but with a sharper focus on impact. The question we are addressing here is which intervention, if implemented, will drive the most meaningful and immediate results? Because this is a problem that is happening right now and it needs to be solved as soon as possible, right? So our recommendation here is to introduce flexible budget thresholds. And this single shift, we believe, will deliver the highest leverage by directly addressing one of the most persistent sources of delay, which is contract addendums, triggered mainly by minor budget deviations. So let me break that down. Like I've already said in the previous slide, the root issues remain the same. Centralized approvals, rigid policies, and manual processes. But if we allow a variance range of, let's say, plus or minus 15% within approved budgets, right, we can actually avoid having to redraft contracts for small and predictable cost changes, right? So this actually reduces the administrative friction, the administrative burden, while still preserving financial controls, right? Yeah, so of course we'll still advocate for decentralization of approvals and automation as we've shown before, but based on stakeholder feedback and some initial impact modeling, flexible thresholds offer the fastest and the most scalable win. And of course, it also will directly support our goal of a 7-day reimbursement. And like I mentioned already, it complements the other enablers under the pillars of people, process, and technology. In short, actually, this is just the 80-20 rule in action. Focus on 20% of the work that gives you 80% of the desired results, right? And this intervention actually solves the largest share of the problem with the least implementation friction. Right. So our working hypothesis right now is that introducing a plus or minus 15% budget variance allowance will reduce contract addendums by at least 50%. And how will this happen? How will we prove and validate this hypothesis, right? 2.1 here shows that we'll first quantify historical contract addendums. And if 50% of the past addendums were for small budget variances of less than 15%, then our hypothesis is valid, right? Secondly, 2.2 here, we'll also benchmark with our peers like the World Bank. If our peers like the World Bank or even USAID achieved greater than 50% addendum reduction by introducing these flexible budget variances, then our hypothesis is valid. And then we'll also, under 2.3, we'll pilot and track this approach, what here we're calling the 15 variance rule, in 2 to 3 field missions. And if the frequency of contract addendums reduces by 50% after introducing this 15% rule, then our hypothesis is valid. Now, the next steps. The next step to validate this hypothesis, this core hypothesis that we have, will be through essentially, like I've mentioned, historical contract data analysis. We'll also benchmark against our peers and conduct that controlled pilot in order to measure outcomes and then refine the implementation model. Let me go back and then refine the implementation model for scale.